What's the most niche fighting game technique you know of? Maybe it's a combo that only works on one character, or a really specific punish, or maybe it's a crazy interaction where you end up getting way more damage than usual. Well, I think I might just have one that trumps yours. Enter Togeki Super Battle Opera, a now defunct yearly tournament series where Japan's best and brightest fighting game players competed in a select number of arcade titles. Literal tons of players have competed in Togeki, ranging from regional killers to fighting game legends. But I bet most of you have never heard of Kenta. Very little information can be found about this Q player hailing from Tokyo. There's hardly any match videos of his play, and those that do exist are all in really poor quality. This, along with an interview of fellow Third Strike player TM done by the discontinued coin-op arcade magazine Arcadia, is basically all that there is out there. So why am I talking about Kenta? Well, there just happens to be one part of his legacy that will forever live on. The Kenta cancel. If we shift our focus back onto Super Battle Opera, we found our subject of study in a top 8 match facing off against the Oro player Dragon. It's a tight back and forth match that comes down to a single last-ditch Oki situation after Kenta lands a grab. Kenta, suspecting either a throw tech or a mid parry, goes for a meaty low attack. But Dragon, being on top of this, successfully parries the crouching heavy punch. And it seems like everything is over for Kenta when this happens. Now, to the untrained eye, this might just look like a regular old super cancel, right? Wrong. For the Third Strike players watching this who are in the know, Q has a very select amount of cancelable normals, and crouching heavy punch is not one of them. Now, the only thing I could find on this was a footnote on Q's character page on the SRK wiki, which reads, Kenta cancel. Super R2 cancel on a parried crouching heavy punch. Oro only. And having done some testing, it's actually even crazier than that. As described, this only works on Oro, and only activates if he successfully parries the heavy punch. But what the wiki page leaves out is that it only works if you happen to be playing on Oro's stage. This makes the Kenta cancel a character-specific, situational, stage-specific technique. Pretty bonkers, right? Luckily for Q, what could end up being an almost useless technique becomes a pretty stable one because of how Q's stage selection functions. He always plays on his opponent's stage in the arcade version. And it also means that Q is significantly stronger in the matchup in any version that doesn't have stage selection. Or well, he would have been if I hadn't just made all this shit up. Not only does Kenta cancel not exist, Kenta doesn't exist. This is not a person named Kenta. All the footage of the crouching heavy punch being cancelled is from a ROM hack called Street Fighter 3 Forward Strike, which is pretty funny in itself. And the footage that looks like it's from a training mode is actually also faked. Yeah, that's right. I faked the fucking input display. Hey, that was pretty good. Might have fooled you. Might even have fooled some Third Strike players. I don't know. It seems kind of fringe enough. Why did I do that to you? To answer that, we kind of have to delve into my YouTube history, I guess. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of stuff from this guy called Big
Lyoh. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of who this person is, they kind of recently started making YouTube content about fighting games. There's a lot of variety. They talk about bad design and bad characters, or good design and good characters. I guess that sort of encapsulates Big Lyoh. Now, this is gonna sound a bit harsh, but what stands out to me from these videos is a sort of lack of effort. Now, I don't mean video editing effort or video quality effort. I don't really care if a video looks like this, or this, or this. That doesn't really matter that much to me. What I'm talking about is a lack of effort to present valid information. Now, to illustrate this, instead of going over this person's entire channel, I figured I would just use a couple of examples to illustrate sort of what I mean. Here in this video, aptly named Fighting Game Garbage Zangief, this video, which is broadly about one specific move that Zangief has in Street Fighter V, Big Lyoh talks a bit about how Gief was, in lack of a better word, pretty garbage in Street Fighter V's release version, talking about how he was obviously one of the worst characters in the game. And he goes on to say that he doesn't necessarily know that much about Street Fighter V release Gief. He states that it's pretty hard to sort of work this out and do your research because the character has been patched out of existence.
It's kind of hard to convey how all characters were bad in older seasons of Street Fighter V, because the only way you can play them is by going into trials and selecting older seasons.
He then, right after this, goes on to say that one of the reasons he was so bad is because his forward fierce headbutt, that thing, it didn't destroy fireballs. I only have cursory knowledge of Zangief in Street Fighter V. I've never been a Gief main, and I don't play Street Fighter V, but I do know that this isn't true. Now, this isn't necessarily a large error or anything, but you can pretty easily go back if you want to do your research and find that, I don't know, in his launch trailer, he does this. You can find guides by people where they do this.
Ta-ta! It destroys fireballs.
You can find match videos of people who do this. It's definitely not impossible. And this kind of highlights my main gripe with this, which is if you do a video on something and as you're writing the script, you sort of come to this point where you have to say, I'm gonna make a statement, but I don't really have anything to back this up with. I feel like there are two things you can broadly do to work this out. Either A, you don't do the video. I know it's a crazy idea, but it is a possibility. Or B, you do your research. I mean, it's not an impossibility to find out if this is true. It's pretty easy, if I'm being honest. It does require some effort, but not a lot. So this sort of illustrates one version of the quote-unquote lack of effort that sort of annoys me, right? There's another one I have here, which I think mainly is just sort of funny, because I think it sort of highlights, I guess, a bit of laziness from the author. So in a video titled Fighting Game Garbage Q, in which Big Lyoh quickly asserts that the video is about Q, but it's not garbage, so a bit of false marketing there, but we'll let it slide. He makes this statement about Q's dash.
And while his dashes are a tiny bit faster than you go, his forward dash doesn't go nearly as far.
Now, the reason I point this out, because it's also a very minute thing, doesn't necessarily really matter, is that I think you can pretty clearly see on the screen that the thing he's talking about isn't true. Like, it's right there. Do you think this is a drastic difference? When I watched this, I got like the slight feeling that I was being had, but then again, most of it is like this. So In the video, he goes on to talk about how one of Q's main issues is the fact that he's a pretty slow character. And I think this isn't necessarily untrue at all. Maybe I would phrase it a bit differently, but people say different things. But then he goes on to say this thing about Q's command grab, capture, and deadly blow.
A bit of a running theme so far is that Q is kinda slow. And yeah, he is. Another area where that's very apparent is his command grab. I'm honestly not sure why this move is so slow.
And I want to stop and just think a little bit about this. I mean, I do feel like there's a pretty good reason for why it isn't as fast as other command grabs. But, maybe that's just me. But having said that, I do think it's sort of important to stop and think about what this means. So if we consider Q, right? Q is really hampered by the fact that he has really poor cancels, he has pretty poor poking normals, and it's pretty hard for him to hit people with capture and deadly blow in sort of general command grab situations, because the risk reward for doing something that beats capture and deadly blow is pretty low. If he doesn't do it, outside of some select situations, getting hit by Q not doing capture and deadly blow, it's probably not going to be that severe. So the point I kind of want to bring up here is that if you talk about how slow this move is, and we sort of extrapolate a better version of it, because if it was faster, of course it would be better, that's sort of a no-brainer, but how fast does it have to be to make a difference? We can imagine capture and deadly blow being like 3 frames or something crazy like that, and we pretty quickly end up with a sort of untenable situation. If Q grabs you from half screen away with like an I3 command grab that does half your health, he would probably be too good, or at least pretty unfun. But if we just tweak the values on capture and deadly blow just a little bit, if we made capture and deadly blow like 3 or 4 frames faster, something like that, something reasonable, does that necessarily change the interactions a lot? I would argue that capture and deadly blow would still lose to the things it loses to, and the risk for the opponent in this interaction wouldn't necessarily swing in either direction. Arguably, I guess it could open up some new parry punishes for Q, but I think that's pretty fringe. And of course, I'm not the first one to notice any mistake on YouTube ever. I mean, people in the comments are probably going buck wild on some of these things. But I do feel like people tend to like laser focus on the stuff they know, and then they sort of just accept the umbrella information that they don't know. Basically just cutting out the mistake and going, well, the rest is fine. But if we rewind this, I feel like the most logical step to take is to go, well, if the things I know about are incorrect, then maybe I should reconsider the rest of the information. It doesn't mean it has to be wrong, but maybe you shouldn't just assume that someone is correct just because you don't know how it works. Now, why am I even talking about this? For me personally, I do feel like right and wrong matters. I personally wouldn't want to put something out that was factually incorrect, but then again, I vividly remember pronouncing one English word incorrectly in like grade 3, so maybe I have some problems. That being said, I do think there's a sort of larger picture here. People who garner large followings online and get their stuff viewed, so not me, have pretty large sway over public opinion. And once that narrative is set in, it's really hard to break. For an example, we can look at 2 different videos of the character 12 in Third Strike as well. This one is made by creator Leon Massey, and I think contains a lot of misinformation about the character. This one is made by Baphael, and is super well researched and, comes from a position of knowledge. Which one of these do you think in their lifetime will sway people's opinion about 12 the most? Now, it should be noted here that Leon Massey did actually pin a comment on the video where he talks about some stuff he got wrong, which I think is admirable. And the video in question is obviously sort of talking about a broader concept than just the character 12. But I don't think that fact excludes it from having to be correct. And as far as printing corrections go, I mean, we don't really see it as a big positive when like a newspaper prints a retraction, right? We kind of wish that they would do the research so they wouldn't have to do that. The problem with retractions and corrections is that most people who sort of take this story in aren't necessarily going to come back and read a correction. Now, I have this idea that misinformation can represent an actual harm and influence a lot of fucked up behavior. And as an example of this, I figured I would talk a little bit about Ling Xiaoyu. Now, if you've ever played Tekken, you know that there's this character, resident trickster, Ling Xiaoyu, who has a stance where she just disappears. Most notably, it allows her to duck under mids, which is sort of a quality that is pretty hard to come by in the Tekken series, or at least it sort of used to be. This can range from sort of annoying to matchup defining, depending on what character you play. And the problem with this idea is that it isn't true. So if we take in this aerial view of this situation, we can pretty clearly see that Ling takes a pretty large lateral step to her right when she activates Art of Phoenix. And she can further increase this by stepping before. And this is something that plays a pretty huge part in how evasive this stance is. Ling isn't necessarily just going under your mids, she's going low and then evading them by stepping as well. Now, having heard this, you might just say something like, yeah, you just kind of showed me how she avoids the mids. How does this help me at all? If we put on our thinking caps and remember that Tekken is a 3D game, which some of you might not believe, but bear with me, we can remember that we are afforded the same amount of lateral movement as our friend Ling Xiaoyu. Stepping with Art of Phoenix is a really strong option to contest her. This is mainly because Art of Phoenix is slow as shit, and Sidestep Right Art of Phoenix is even slower. Does this mean that Art of Phoenix doesn't go under any mids? No, it doesn't. But when you see something like this on Twitter, that isn't taking into account the fact that a large amount of these moves will actually hit if you're on axis with the character. Now, I have a feeling that this sort of representation of the character, that is, the she just goes under my mids randomly kind of deal, can clump together with other stuff and form this opinion that Ling Xiaoyu as a character is bullshit, and the people who play her are also bullshit. And I don't necessarily think this is a weird place to end up as a player. I mean, if you're constantly fed with the information that this character just randomly breaks the rules of the game, as it were, then of course you're gonna end up disliking her. I mean, what's that quote?
People fear what they don't understand, and they hate what they can't conquer.
Now, a part of this, of course, is that the people putting out this information don't necessarily have to harbor any ill will against the character or the players or anything like that. They're just wrong. But then people take this as gospel, and it helps inform this sort of hateful opinion of the character and their player base or whatever it is. Now, maybe you feel like I'm just sort of jumping to conclusions here, but I'd like to take the time here to show you some stuff I did about a year ago or so. In preparation for another video project that never ended up happening, I interviewed a bunch of players from different fighting games who play poorly represented and disliked characters. Here's what some of them said. Now, what can we do to remedy this? Well, first off, you as the viewer can stop taking what people say at face value and trusting them. And you might be going, well, why the fuck should I trust you? And the answer to that is you shouldn't. You shouldn't trust me. Don't trust what I say just because I said it. That's bad practice. And of course, we should definitely call out people who are, actively talking mad shit to or at people and, being hateful for them just wanting to play a game. That's horrible, right? We can all agree that's horrible. But I do think it's worth it for us to investigate a bit how much of the stuff we hear from creators is actually true. Their voices, of course, matter. I feel like everyone should be able to share, but I do think we should be a bit more critical of what the stuff they put out contains.